This is Australia, land of footy, meat pies and disposable prime ministers. And this is Western Australia, land of iron ore, cute marsupials and, well, places ending with up. On the 13th of March 2021, something extraordinary happened in this usually unremarkable place. In a state election, the incumbent Premier Mark McGowan rewrote the political history books with a crushing win over his Conservative opposition. McGowan's Labor Party secured 53 of the 59 available seats in the WA Parliament, reducing the Conservative Liberal Party's presence to just 2 seats.
We've been through a lot together over the course of the last year. The pandemic has been a difficult time for every West Australian.
More like a nuclear annihilation than a landslide, the swing away from the Conservative parties is unprecedented. By securing 60% of the popular vote, Mark McGowan and his party set a new high watermark in Australian politics, a record that is unlikely to be challenged at either state or federal level in the foreseeable future. McGowan himself garnered huge popularity in the lead-up to the election. Many opinion polls had him as an unbackable favourite, with close to 90% popularity amongst voters. Women wrote love songs about him.
Do you want to pick me up? Go to the pub and then grab a kebab with me. Mark McGowan, I'm in love. I'd do anything for you and your heart.
One man even tattooed a portrait of McGowan on his leg. Just ponder that for a minute. Have you ever heard of any leader of any democracy anywhere in the world commanding that sort of popularity? Apparently, Zac Kirkup, the now politically retired leader of the Conservatives, must have spent quite a bit of time pondering this. 2 weeks out from the election, in a television interview, he actually conceded that he had no chance of winning. So how did this political miracle occur? Did McGowan just have the best spin doctors in the world? Or was it simply the positive support that always accrues to leaders during a crisis? Well, the answer could be even simpler than that. McGowan took firm, decisive action in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. Choosing pragmatism over ideology and public health over economic imperatives, he deftly steered his state through the crisis. Staring down criticism from the Prime Minister and other state leaders, McGowan closed the borders to WA to prevent any imported cases of the virus. He refused to allow foreign cruise ships to dock and forced citizens returning from overseas to undertake mandatory quarantine for 2 weeks. The result has been one of the lowest infection rates in the world, at just 93 locally acquired cases over 2020. It's important to note that in the absence of risk of infection, life in WA has been by and large normal. No masks, almost no lockdowns, and minimal job losses. We have seen a similar outcome in New Zealand, where last October Jacinda Ardern won an equally historic victory over her Conservative opposition. Now, before you start throwing shoes at the screen and shouting, "But that sort of draconian action would not be tolerated in a liberal democracy," or "Those lockdowns would kill the economy," let me address those 2 concerns. Firstly, the most strident personal freedom objection came from the mining baron Clive Palmer, who interestingly is not even a West Australian, but has major business interests there. Mr Palmer attempted to have the closed borders reopened by the courts, but soon realised the court of public opinion was against him. In poll after poll, more than 70% of citizens supported the border closures. So, would the citizens of a liberal democracy support the temporary removal of their personal freedom in the face of a crisis? Answer: if it keeps us alive, you bet we would. On the question of economic impact, this is a very important concern. However, the facts on the ground suggest that putting public health ahead of economic interests in the end is the best thing for the economy. The journalist Peter Harcher had this to say on the matter recently when discussing the Australian response to COVID.
Why are we seeing that growth, that strong growth in jobs, and they're full-time jobs?
Well, the essential answer to that is that despite the initial impression going into this pandemic that there was a trade-off between economic activity and health outcomes, what we've learned is they're both part of a continuum, and that the good health outcomes are a prerequisite for the economic activities.
It seems many leaders have fallen into the trap of believing there is a trade-off between keeping people safe from the virus and protecting the economy. That if you can find some sweet spot position, everything will be fine. But this is a false dichotomy. Let's say you favour the economy and tell people they must put their country first and keep going to work each day. Just wear a mask and hope for the best. keep calm and carry on. Pretty soon, you'll have an exponential growth in infections, followed by an overrun health system, followed by mass casualties, worse than any war could ever cause. Now, call me a cold-hearted capitalist for pointing this out, but dead people don't buy stuff, and nor do people who have seen a friend or relative die from a deadly disease and are scared to go outdoors for fear of catching it. So now you have a population of traumatised people who feel betrayed by those in power for not taking the problem seriously. The last thing on their mind is to go shopping or go on a holiday or start a new business. And so you no longer have the consumption that underpins all modern economies. In the end, without humanity, there is no economy. So there really is no choice but to make economic concerns subordinate to public health. It seems to me that the Western Australia example proves this point. In spite of Mark McGowan's harsh lockdowns and quarantine rules, the WA economy is doing remarkably well. Goods exports continue to grow, while retail spending is actually higher than pre-pandemic levels. Job vacancies are the highest they have been in a decade, and there appears to be a housing boom underway. All of this points to a very optimistic outlook. It seems West Australians are feeling confident about their safety. They trust their government, and they are happy to go out and spend and invest. Sure, they had to endure some discomfort in the form of lockdowns and travel restrictions, but they know it was for good reason, and they are grateful to their leader for taking the tough decisions and acting in their best interest. And this, it seems, is how, as a political leader, you reach 90% popularity. The counterfactuals are easy to find. Look at Britain and America, where the heads of state failed to take the virus seriously, completely mismanaged the response, and put their economies ahead of the health of their citizens. Trump has already paid the political price for his indifference. Boris Johnson is yet to face the people's judgment at the ballot box. So what does all this mean for other political leaders and their constituents? Well, this is what I think it means, but feel free to argue with me. Firstly, when you are facing a pandemic, you are in a warlike situation and need to adopt a wartime posture. Recognise you are in a war and all bets are off when it comes to government policy. Rigid ideology must give way to pragmatism. Secondly, know your enemy. When confronting a deadly virus, understand it doesn't respect geopolitical boundaries. It cares not about political ideology or personal beliefs. It cannot be negotiated with or assuaged. Its mission is simple: find another host and multiply. So take the advice of your medical experts, your scientists, and your epidemiologists. If they tell you you need to lock down to enable tracking and tracing to catch up, or to shut down a newly emerging cluster, then listen to them and act swiftly and decisively. Be transparent with your constituents and explain why the harsh measures are necessary. Go hard and go early on strategy. If you think you might need to lock down in a few weeks' time, then do it now. Every day you delay will add another week to the time it takes to get the virus under control, and the health of your people and your economy will be the worst for it. Every country and jurisdiction that has done this has been able to hold the death and disease to levels at below seasonal flu. This includes Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Vietnam and Taiwan. Don't make the mistake of seeing the pandemic as an economic crisis. Yes, it will damage the economy, but that is a battleground, it is not the war. Tackle the health crisis first, and that will give you the best economic outcomes. Provide fiscal and monetary support to businesses, workers and the unemployed. The aim should be to keep the economy on life support until the health crisis has passed. Then taper back to pre-pandemic settings when it is appropriate to do so. Yes, this is borrowing from the future, but was there ever a better thing to borrow for than a healthy, productive society? Get these simple things right, and you will not only be looking after the well-being of your people and your economy, but who knows, you may emerge as the next political rock star. I'm sure many will argue, oh yes, but Australia and New Zealand are islands and can easily close their borders. However, consider this. Australia is actually a continent with close to 80% of the land area of the USA. Like America, it is a federation of states with all the policy harmonisation challenges that implies. New Zealand is larger in land area than the UK, with a similar political structure. Both countries have economies that are heavily dependent on export and tourism. In normal times, these countries rely on free movement of goods and labour from overseas to keep their economies running smoothly. To suggest that lockdowns were an easy decision to make or implement is nonsense. Of course, Australia and New Zealand have low population density, making containment easier, but note, Taiwan is twice as populous as the UK and 18 times the USA, yet its COVID cases are 1,600 times lower than the former and 2,250 times lower than the latter. To say that the UK could not have responded in the same way as Australia or New Zealand or Taiwan is a false assertion. The same is true for America. While this video is primarily aimed at those in political power, I feel compelled to point out the implications of all this to ordinary citizens. If you're fortunate enough to live in a democracy, then you have the power to hold your leaders to account for their response to COVID-19. If you choose not to exercise your right to vote, then you are sending a message that they can pretty much do as they please and you'll just suck it up. So, if you're not registered to vote already, perhaps now you should think about doing so. This sends a message that you are watching and that a day of judgment will come to those in power. And don't just accept the glib argument that, oh well, we did the best we could under the circumstances and, well, we all pulled together as a nation to fight this terrible virus. That is an abrogation of responsibility for poor decision making and poor government, and it should be rejected outright and assertively at the ballot box. If your government hasn't responded in the way of Taiwan, New Zealand, Australia, Vietnam, then they don't deserve your respect or your vote. Thanks for watching.